Turkey is collapsing. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people have come out in protest after the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was arrested. Prosecutors have accused him of corruption and aiding a terrorist group, PKK. But you might be surprised to hear that that's not the important part. As the famous saying goes, in politics, truth lies in the timing, not the action itself. That's definitely the case this time. Mayor İmamoğlu was scheduled to be announced as a presidential candidate for the opposition party in the next coming days. Right before that could happen though, he was arrested. The timing tells us everything we need to know. Fortunately, right before he was arrested, he did record a video for his supporters. Now, this has to be one of the calmest videos I have seen from someone who's about to be arrested. The police had already raided his house and they were inside the house when he's doing this recording. He's just calmly tying his tie, making a video for his supporters, then he publishes that video on Twitter and he walks out and gets arrested. Watch the video yourself.
Üzülerek söylüyorum. Milletimizin iradesini
I say with regret that a handful of minds are trying to usurp the will of our nation by abusing the police. The security forces of this country have massed at the door of my home, homes of 16 million Istanbulites. Hundreds of police are massed. We are facing bullying, but I want you to know that I won't be undaunted. I love you all so much. I entrust myself to my people. Let all our nation know that I will stand upright.
Hepinizi çok seviyorum. Ben kendimi milletime emanet ediyorum.
I will continue to fight with that person and his mind, which uses this whole process like an apparatus.
Aparat gibi kullanan aklıyla mücadeleye devam edeceğim.
Now, just a day before this, İmamoğlu had his university degree rescinded, which is a very weird thing to happen in your 50s. İmamoğlu is 52 and he graduated university 35 years ago. But you see, in Turkey, you have to have a higher education degree to become president. That means, since his degree was rescinded, he cannot become a presidential candidate. The timing is everything. Here are some more details about why President Erdogan is so specifically targeting him.
Yeah, that's right. Ekrem İmamoğlu is widely seen as only the man that can defeat President Erdogan in any presidential election. In fact, he had launched his presidential bid in the last few weeks, touring the country to large crowds, enthusiastic supporters all across the political spectrum. He has his ability of drawing people from all the left, the right, nationalists, Kurdish voters, and he has this common touch of the people, which is the reason why he managed to secure the winning of the Istanbul mayorship way back 6-7 years ago, which was a shock to Turkish politics, was seen as Erdogan's stronghold that could never be taken from him. He managed to do that, and not only done that, he's built on his support. He has a very big majority here, and that was seen as his base to challenge Erdogan. Now, these moves are widely seen as an attempt by President Erdogan and supporters to thwart this campaign before it even starts. The annulment of his university degree, which would effectively end his hope, and now his detention is seen as an attempt by Erdogan and his supporters to take him out of the political arena. Now, Erdogan and his supporters strongly dismiss this. They say that this is purely about the judiciary acting in accordance with the investigation they've been carrying for many years, saying that there are a case to answer for over graft, a long-term investigation, saying that there's been a long history of stealing from Istanbul, according to the president, and said that this prosecution is just confirming that.
Now, this all seems even more complicated when we realize that the current president, President Erdogan, cannot run for office again, as he's in his second term and Turkish constitution doesn't allow more than 2 terms for any president. But there is a loophole, and I'm not trying to give any ideas to Steve Bannon, but in Turkey, Erdogan can call an early election before his term ends, and if he wins that election, then he can technically extend his presidency into a 3rd term. Based on everything that has happened in the past few days, I'm guessing that President Erdogan is planning to call an early election. Clearly, this is all not good for Turkish economy because foreign investors usually don't like when dictators upend democracy and the rule of law. That's why the Turkish lira has crashed to an all-time low against the US dollar. Now, I feel for the investors, but Turkey has done the same thing in 2022 and the same thing before that. They should have known better.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you." If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Now, I was just a little bit joking, but it's not just Turkish lira that's crashing. Everything is falling. The bonds, the stocks, and even the indexes. In fact, the fall was so drastic and so quick that they had to put in the circuit breakers. Basically, the trading had to be paused. It's expected that the fall will get even worse once everything resumes. That's why just one of the many reasons protests are happening all across Turkey. Democracy is at stake. Turkish economy was struggling for the most part of the last decade, and it was just showing some signs of recovery, and then we have actions like this from the current administration. It seems that things will only get worse from here for the Turkish citizens. Now, before moving forward, recently we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we've been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a faceless YouTube channel. Even though I try my best to reply to every single email, sometimes these just take up too much of my time, or they ask the same question I have answered before. That's why I have decided to put all my YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone who's interested in starting your own channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. There, I'll share everything you need and answer any questions you have about faceless YouTube. So sign up now because unfortunately, unlike the YouTube videos, Bootcamp is more like a Zoom call, so it's limited to just 100 people. So sign up for a slot before it gets full. Now, let's get back to the video.
Turkey might just be on its way to becoming the next superpower, and leading the charge is none other than Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Whether you love him or hate him, you've got to admit he's been playing one hell of a game when it comes to his country's geopolitical interests. Just last week, Erdogan showed up at the European Political Community Summit in Budapest and, once again, made it clear that Turkey is still very much committed to joining the European Union. The timing of this announcement couldn't be more crucial, especially given the current geopolitical climate. But here's where it gets really interesting. Right now, Erdogan is still playing both sides. He's keeping Russia a bit close while still staying constantly in touch with NATO and the EU. But if this actually goes through, if Turkey does manage to join the EU, then the balancing act would be over. Turkey would become a fully committed Western ally, leaving Putin standing there looking like a fool who bet on the wrong horse with one less quote-unquote neutral partner to rely on. When Russia decided to invade Ukraine in 2022, most countries were quick to distance themselves from Moscow. Sanctions were slapped, diplomatic ties were cut, and everyone was scrambling to reduce their dependence on Russian energy. But Turkey took a completely different approach. Instead of backing off, Turkey went all in on buying Russian oil and gas. In fact, Turkey's energy imports from Russia almost doubled between 2021 and 2022, jumping to a whopping $41 billion. You might be wondering, why did Erdogan go this route? Well, at that point in time, Turkey was in the middle of a severe economic crisis. Inflation was through the roof, the Turkish lira was plummeting, and ordinary citizens were struggling with rising prices. So the country needed a stable energy supply to keep its economy afloat, and Russia was more than willing to provide it. Now, maybe from Putin's perspective, this was him throwing a bone to Erdogan, offering a lifeline in the hopes of securing Erdogan's loyalty. But in reality, he couldn't have been more wrong, because Erdogan was playing a much bigger game. From Erdogan's perspective, securing cheap Russian energy was a way to buy time. It allowed him to stabilize the economy, keep factories running, and avoid the kind of energy crunch that was sending Europe into a panic. But at the time, Erdogan knew he had the bigger hand, so he waited for the perfect moment to strike. And sure enough, just a few months back, Erdogan made a pretty bold statement by openly declaring that Crimea should be returned to Ukraine, citing international law as his backing. Now, that's not exactly what you'd expect from a leader who's supposed to be cozying up to Putin, is it? But why now? And why is Turkey joining the EU such a big deal, especially since it's already a NATO member? Shouldn't that mean that it doesn't really change much? Well, that's where you're mistaken. So let's start with the basics. First, the European Union and NATO are two very different clubs, so each has its own set of rules and priorities. NATO, at its core, is a military alliance. Its primary focus is defense and security. The whole idea behind NATO is that if one member is attacked, the others are obligated to come to its defense. It's a collective security pact designed to deter potential aggressors because they know they'd be up against not just one country, but an entire alliance. But beyond that, NATO doesn't concern itself much with how its members run their economies, enforce laws, or govern their citizens. It's mainly about ensuring military readiness and strategic unity. The European Union, on the other hand, is an entirely different beast. It's an economic and political union all about integration. Being a member of the EU means opening up your borders, aligning your laws, and committing to shared values like democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Joining the EU is also about transforming your entire economy to fit into a single market of over 450 million people. For Turkey, this would be a monumental shift. The country is already the second largest military in NATO after the United States. It is also a significant player in areas like trade, agriculture, and energy transit. If Turkey were to join the EU, it would gain access to one of the largest and most prosperous markets in the world. This could be a massive boost for Turkey's economy, which has been struggling in recent years. European businesses would get more access to Turkey's markets, while Turkish companies would benefit from the EU's trade networks. So clearly, joining the EU would be a massive shift for Turkey, but it also means that Turkey would need to align its laws and policies with EU standards, which is one of the main reasons it's taken decades for the country to even get close to membership. In a bit, we'll explore why Turkey's journey to join the EU has stretched on for decades. But before that, let's focus on the scenario of how Turkey joining the European Union could turn into a major setback for Vladimir Putin and his military ambitions, particularly in the Black Sea. As of this moment, Turkey holds control over two of the world's most strategically critical maritime choke points, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles Straits. Together, these narrow waterways are collectively referred to as the Turkish Straits. These straits form the sole maritime link between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. For Russia, this connection is nothing short of a lifeline, especially for its Black Sea fleet. Without access through these straits, the fleet is essentially trapped, unable to project power or support operations beyond the Black Sea region. That gives Turkey a unique and potent leverage, especially when dealing with Moscow. Under the 1936 Montreux Convention, Turkey has the legal authority to regulate naval transit through these straits, especially during wartime. This means Turkey has the legal framework to shut the door on Russian warships trying to enter or exit the Black Sea, effectively isolating Russia's naval capabilities in the region. Initially, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Turkey was hesitant to invoke Montreux Convention's wartime clauses. Despite issuing public statements condemning Russia's aggression, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan remained cautious about taking concrete actions. Some analysts even suggested that Erdogan's reluctance to act decisively was his way of throwing Putin a bone, preserving their fragile partnership amid growing international tensions. But then this hesitation had significant consequences for Ukraine because the open Turkish Straits allowed Russia to reinforce its Black Sea fleet. During the first few days, at least 6 Russian warships and a submarine passed through these waters, moving from other naval bases to bolster their presence in the Black Sea. At the same time, Turkey's actions didn't go unnoticed. Policymakers in Washington and Brussels raised concerns about Turkey's inaction, particularly given its status as a NATO member. Now, Erdogan had to please the West, so just 6 days after Russia's invasion, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu announced that Turkey would close the straits to all military ships, invoking the wartime provisions of the Montreux Convention. For Putin, the closure of the Turkish Straits was yet another embarrassment. Turkey's sudden shift also had broader geopolitical implications. It reassured NATO allies that Turkey was willing to align itself more closely with the alliance's objectives, despite its earlier hesitation. But Russia, being Russia, found a loophole in the Montreux Convention to exploit. The agreement includes an exemption that allows warships to pass through the straits if they're returning to their registered home ports. This meant Turkey couldn't fully block Russian naval access to the Black Sea, as Russia could simply claim its vessels were merely returning to their home ports. However, the rule also stated that these ships couldn't participate in any ongoing conflict. And yet, as we all know, Vladimir Putin played by his own rules and ignored that restriction entirely. Conveniently, Russia also had nearly half of its combined Mediterranean Black Sea fleet, over 4 dozen ships, stationed just outside the straits. By claiming these vessels were returning to their bases, Russia legally bypassed Turkey's restrictions and reinforced its Black Sea fleet. Now imagine if Turkey were a member of the EU. Turkey wouldn't just be acting independently in managing the straits. Its its decision would align more closely with EU policies. Realistically, the EU could push Turkey to adopt stricter interpretations of the Montreux Convention or find ways to limit the quote-unquote return-to-base loophole. This would effectively trap its Black Sea fleet in the Black Sea and block Russia's ability to project power into key regions like the Middle East or North Africa. For example, during the Syrian civil war, Russia relied heavily on its Mediterranean fleet to support operations. Without access to the Mediterranean, such actions would become nearly impossible. Beyond military implications, Russia has two critical warm water ports in the Black Sea, the port of Novorossiysk and the port of Sevastopol. These ports are vital for exporting oil, grain, and other commodities to global markets. However, for these exports to reach destinations beyond the Black Sea, they must pass through Turkish-controlled waters. For now, the straits remain open for commercial shipping, even during conflicts, ensuring the flow of trade and avoiding undue disruptions. According to data from Nordic Monitor, 39,000 vessels transited the Istanbul Strait in 2023, up from 35,146 in 2022, although these numbers are still part of a broader decline. To put this in perspective, traffic through the strait peaked in 2007 with 56,606 vessels but has been gradually decreasing, partly due to shifting trade routes and more recently due to the impact of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Generally, cargo ships make up the largest category, followed by bulk grain carriers, essential for global food supply chains. Oil and liquefied gas tankers rank third. This shows how important this route is for energy exports. But this could also be a factor where the EU could strike. Before digging deeper, just a reminder to hit the like button below. It helps us tremendously in the YouTube algorithm when making geopolitical videos that YouTube is often restricting. For instance, imagine a scenario where every Russian cargo ship passing through the Bosporus is subjected to enhanced scrutiny, backed by EU regulations. These inspections could slow down trade, increase costs for Russian exports, and disrupt supply chains. In a worst-case scenario, the EU could even push for a blockade of Russian vessels, citing security concerns or violations of international norms. Such measures would severely impact Russia's ability to move its commodities to global markets, creating economic bottlenecks that would ripple across its economy. Similarly, delays in grain exports could damage Russia's reputation as a reliable supplier, leading buyers to seek alternatives and further isolating Moscow's economy. Not only that, but Turkey would also be obligated to adhere to the sanctions and economic policies implemented by the EU. This would be a setback not only for Putin, but also for Erdogan, because Turkey's purchase of Russian crude oil has dramatically increased since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the first half of 2024, Turkey went from being the 14th largest buyer of Russian crude oil to becoming the 3rd largest importer. Refined oil products imported from facilities like Turkey's Star Refinery, Tupras Izmit Refinery, and Tupras Aliaga Izmir Refinery alone have generated an estimated $750 million in tax revenue for the Kremlin. These funds indirectly support Russia's war effort. However, as an EU member, Turkey would lose the ability to make these independent economic decisions. Membership in the EU comes with an obligation to align with its collective economic policies, including sanctions on Russia. But as I said earlier, it won't stop at energy. EU membership would also mean that cargo ships passing through the Turkish straits would face much stricter inspections. The EU would likely impose heavy inspections on Russian cargo under the pretext of enforcing sanctions. This could include scrutinizing cargo items that breach sanctions or are dual-use goods with potential military applications. Such inspections would again create significant delays, increasing shipping costs and disrupt trade flows for Russia. Joining the EU would also require Turkey to sever all defense trade with Russia as a part of aligning itself with EU policies. At first glance, this might not sound like a big deal because, as of now, the numbers aren't staggering, but the real impact lies in the long-term consequences and how this shift would shape Turkey's future policies and alliances for decades to come. A prime example of this would be the purchase of the S-400 missile system. Back in 2017, Turkey struck a $2.5 billion deal with Russia for this advanced air defense system. This sent shockwaves through Turkey's relationship with its NATO allies, particularly the United States. It showed that Turkey was willing to pursue an independent defense policy, even if it meant clashing with the West. But that independence came with a cost. Before all of this, Turkey had actually approached the United States to buy the Patriot missile defense system, but the US declined the offer. Washington wasn't comfortable giving Turkey access to such a sensitive system, especially since Turkey also wanted the ability to produce or modify the Patriots locally. To make things worse, the US decided to pull out the few Patriot systems it had stationed in southern Turkey, claiming they were no longer necessary. For Turkey, this felt like a major blow to its defense capabilities. At the time, the region was becoming increasingly unstable. There was the conflict in Syria, and the risk of missile attacks was growing. With few options left and a real need to boost its defenses, Turkey turned to Russia and struck a deal for the S-400 missile system. The S-400 is considered to be one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. It can detect, track, and take out multiple targets simultaneously from up to 250 miles away. For Turkey, this system was a solid match for defending against threats like high-speed fighter jets, cruise missiles, and even stealth aircraft. It filled a critical gap at a time when Turkey felt increasingly isolated in its security needs. But there's a catch. The S-400 works best when it's integrated into the host country's military infrastructure. That's one of the reasons why it's so effective. But for NATO, this created a whole new set of problems. You see, NATO's defense systems are supposed to work as a unified network, sharing data, intelligence, and operational protocols seamlessly. NATO feared that integrating the S-400 into Turkey's system could give Russian technicians or engineers access to sensitive NATO information. The system could collect intelligence on NATO aircraft, like their flight patterns, radio signatures, and operational strategies, and that data could end up in Moscow's hands. So this was a genuine risk, and that's why the United States reacted so strongly to Turkey's decision to buy the S-400. Now, keep in mind that all of this was happening while Turkey was already a part of the F-35 stealth fighter jet program. Turkey was one of the original investors in the Joint Strike Fighter project, putting $175 million to help develop the aircraft. The plan was for Turkey to buy 100 F-35s, which would have made it a significant player in the program. Turkish companies were also heavily involved in producing critical components for the jets, from fuselage parts to wiring systems. If everything had gone as planned, these manufacturing contracts could have brought huge economic and technological benefits to Turkey's defense industries. That's thousands of jobs, advanced manufacturing expertise, and a stronger industrial base. But when Turkey decided to go with the S-400 deal, the United States didn't take it lightly. Washington warned that there would be serious consequences. Despite the backlash, President Erdogan doubled down, seeing the S-400 purchase as essential for addressing Turkey's security needs and asserting its independence in defense decisions. So, the US kicked Turkey out of the F-35 program entirely. Turkish pilots training on the jets in the F-35 were sent home, and the deal to buy 100 F-35s was scrapped. Not only did Turkey lose out on the F-35 jets, but its defense firms took a massive hit as well. These companies, which had been manufacturing key components for the F-35, lost billions of dollars in contracts. Then, just a year later, in December 2020, the United States imposed sanctions on Turkey under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, CAATSA. These sanctions specifically targeted Turkey's Presidency of Defense Industries, SSB, the agency responsible for managing the country's defense procurement and development. The SSB was banned from obtaining export licenses for U.S. defense technology and weapons, effectively cutting Turkey off from critical American military hardware and expertise. On top of that, 4 senior officials, including SSB's head, Ismail Demir, were blacklisted. This meant asset freezes and visa restrictions, further isolating Turkey's defense sector from crucial international partnerships. For a country aiming to expand and modernize its defense industry, this was a serious setback. Despite all this mess, Turkey stood firm in its decision to purchase the S-400. Instead of backing down, it went a step further by conducting tests of the system, escalating tensions with both the US and NATO. Now, this is what you have to understand. Instances like this have a noticeable impact on how the European Union views Turkey. While the S-400 wasn't the only reason the EU has been hesitant about Turkey's accession, it certainly added another layer of complexity to an already strained relationship. Even now, the S-400 issue remains a major point of contention between Turkey and its NATO allies, especially the United States. But after 5 years of tensions, it seems now like there could be a path toward resolution. Over the summer, reports emerged suggesting that the United States had submitted a detailed proposal to resolve the issue. The plan reportedly allows Turkey to retain the S-400 systems on its territory, but under strict conditions. The systems would be stored under US supervision at the Incirlik Air Base, effectively neutralizing their operational use while addressing NATO's security concerns. In return, the US reportedly offered to readmit Turkey into the F-35 program and lift the sanctions. If true, this proposal marked a significant shift in Washington's stance, signaling a willingness to compromise to bring Turkey closer to the West and away from Russia's influence. Such an arrangement could potentially heal some of the damage in the US-Turkey relations, while also strengthening Turkey's position within NATO and the European Union. But Turkey officially denied these reports, claiming that it had no intention of changing its stance on the S-400. Despite this denial, analysts believe there's still room for a deal, even if it doesn't look exactly like the one described in these reports. It wouldn't be surprising if a compromise emerges where the S-400 is effectively stored away or rendered inactive in a way that minimizes any risk to NATO systems, especially the F-35. Now, the timing of this is important to note. Back in 2019, when Turkey first acquired the S-400, the geopolitical landscape was very different. At that time, Turkey was trying to strike a balance between its relationships with the West and Russia, but That's not the case today. With the war in Ukraine, Turkey has adopted a much firmer stance against Vladimir Putin. It's been diplomatically supporting Ukraine and even supplying Bayraktar drones that have become a critical part of Ukraine's defense. So in a way, holding on to the S-400 no longer makes the same strategic sense it once did. Even if we set aside the S-400 issue, Turkey still has a long road ahead before the EU can seriously consider it as a potential member, and the challenges ahead go far beyond defense policies. They're rooted in the EU's foundational principles and history. To understand where all this comes from, you have to look back at Europe after World War II. The continent was devastated, and something drastic had to be done to prevent such a catastrophic war from ever happening again. That's when NATO was born, in 1949. It started as a survival pact for 12 countries. The idea was simple, and it still holds true today. If one member is attacked, it's considered an attack on all of them. NATO created a unified front to deter external threats, but that left another pressing issue: how to stop wars from breaking out within Europe itself. So just 2 years later, in 1951, 6 countries, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, formed the European Coal and Steel Community. The idea was that these nations shared resources essential for war, like coal and steel, and they'd have no reason to fight over them. The idea was as simple as that, and that's maybe why it worked. After all, if your industries and resources are intertwined with your neighbors, starting a conflict makes no sense. As I mentioned earlier, NATO is primarily a defense pact, focused on military collaboration and collective security. That's why in 1952, Turkey was brought into the fold. At the time, Turkey was eager to modernize and align itself with the West. The country had recently transitioned into a multi-party democracy after decades of one-party rule, and joining NATO was a way to signal that it belonged among the Western powers. But even back then, it was clear that Turkey was the odd one out. Geographically, most of Turkey is in Asia. Culturally, it leaned more towards the Middle East than Europe. But strategically, Turkey was a jackpot for NATO. Its location is like an ultimate gatekeeper, sitting right at the crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union. This gave NATO a crucial advantage. Turkey's position made it a natural barrier against Soviet expansion into the Middle East, and provided a critical foothold for monitoring and controlling this volatile region. Meanwhile, the European Coal and Steel Community was proving to be a huge success. By 1959, the same 6 countries decided to take their collaboration to the next level. They signed the Treaty of Rome, creating the European Economic Community, EEC, which laid the groundwork for what we now know as the European Union. The EEC wasn't just about coal and steel anymore. It was about fostering economic integration and creating a single market for goods, services, labor, and capital. Turkey saw this as a golden opportunity. Gaining access to European markets would be a game changer for its economy and international standing. So in 1959, Turkey applied for associate membership in the EEC. 4 years later, in 1963, the two sides signed the agreement for creating an association between the Republic of Turkey and the European Economic Community, better known as the Ankara Agreement. This agreement set out a 3-step process aimed at creating a customs union and eventually paving the way for Turkey's full membership into the European Economic Community. This first step was all about Turkey laying the groundwork for economic integration. The EEC recognized that Turkey's economy was significantly less developed than those of its European counterparts. So, during this phase, Turkey would receive financial and technical assistance to modernize its economy. The idea was to help Turkey build a stronger industrial and agricultural base, making it more competitive in the European markets. This phase also gave Turkey time to begin aligning its laws and policies with those of the EEC. The transition phase focused on creating a customs union between Turkey and the EEC. A customs union is a trade agreement where member countries agree to eliminate tariffs and trade barriers on goods exchanged between them, while also adopting a common external tariff for goods coming in from non-member countries. If all of this went well, then the final phase was to be a full member. But this still hasn't happened yet. During the 1970s, Turkey was facing severe political instability. Military coups, economic crises, and widespread social unrest became defining features of the era. These internal struggles made it difficult for Turkey to align itself with European standards outlined in the Ankara Agreement. For Europe, Turkey's instability raised serious doubts about its readiness to join the bloc, and those doubts stalled the process. Sure, the Ankara Agreement technically remained in effect, but there was literally no progress towards the membership. On one hand, Turkey was growing frustrated, whereas Europe was waiting to see whether Turkey could stabilize itself and catch up economically before any serious steps towards membership could be taken. The 1980s were no different in terms of challenges. After the military coup in 1980, democratic institutions were suspended, and a period of military rule followed. During this time, reports of human rights abuses emerged, including restrictions on free speech, political arrests, and the suppression of dissent. These issues drew widespread criticism from European governments and human rights organizations, further tarnishing Turkey's image in the eyes of the European community. But by 1983, there were signs of change. Turkey transitioned back to civilian rule, with a new government elected under a revised constitution. The new leadership, particularly under Prime Minister Turgut Özal, focused on economic reforms aimed at modernizing the country. Özal's policies emphasized liberalization, privatization, and opening Turkey to global markets. These changes started to deliver tangible results. Turkey's economy began to recover, exports grew, and foreign investments increased. Turkey also took a bold step in 1987 and applied for full EU membership. For Ankara, this application symbolized its commitment to aligning more closely with Europe and proving it was serious about being part of the Western Bloc. However, the EU wasn't convinced. Like last time, the EU again cited Turkey's human rights record and questioned its commitment to the EU's democratic and social values. The EU ultimately rejected the application, a decision that came as a significant blow to Turkey. But Ankara was still determined, and for many years remained on the EU's radar. By 1995, Turkey finally signed the second step, aka a customs union agreement with the EU. This agreement seemed like a milestone in the Turkey-EU relations. Under the customs union, Turkey removed tariffs on industrial goods and aligned its trade policies with EU standards. Turkey's exports to Europe soared, and the deal helped establish a stronger economic relationship between the two. But at the time, this economic success couldn't hide the political challenges Turkey continued to face. The Kurdish conflict in southeastern Turkey was escalating. Reports of military crackdowns, displacement of Kurdish communities, and restrictions on Kurdish culture and political expression became a recurring source of tension. These issues directly conflicted with the EU's emphasis on minority rights and democratic governance, further complicating Turkey's EU aspirations. Then again, Turkish leaders like Necmettin Erbakan, who became the country's first Islamic prime minister in 1996, brought concerns about Turkey's commitment to its secular foundations. Erbakan's rhetoric and policies, which leaned toward promoting Islamic values in public life, raised alarms in Europe, where secularism was seen as a cornerstone of modern democratic governance. The EU couldn't turn a blind eye to Turkey's actions, and during the 1997 Luxembourg summit, it made that abundantly clear. The Union granted candidate status to 11 other countries, but Turkey was deliberately left out. For Turkey, this exclusion wasn't just a setback, it felt like a slap in the face, a bitter reminder of Europe's lingering hesitation about fully accepting it. But by 1999, things took a turn. At the Helsinki summit, Turkey was finally recognized as an official candidate for EU membership. Turkey's leaders began to see EU accession not just as a foreign policy goal, but as a framework for domestic reform. Over the next 5 years, Turkey embarked on a focused trajectory, laying the groundwork to meet EU's stringent membership criteria. By 2003, Recep Tayyip Erdogan's rise to power brought new energy to Turkey's EU aspirations. As prime minister, Erdogan recognized the widespread popularity of EU membership among Turkish citizens, so he used the prospect of membership as leverage to implement major domestic reforms. One of his key moves was pushing the military out of politics, abolishing the death penalty, and allowing Kurdish language broadcasts. Erdogan also introduced reformist policies to meet EU's Copenhagen criteria. By 2005, Turkey officially began formal accession negotiations with the EU. At first, this seemed like the long-awaited breakthrough Turkey had been striving for, but as the process unfolded, it quickly became clear that things weren't going to move as smoothly as Ankara might have hoped. The EU's negotiations delved into highly detailed criteria that Turkey hadn't fully anticipated, so it quickly became apparent that Turkey wouldn't be joining the EU anytime soon. In nearly 2 decades of talks, Turkey has managed to open negotiations on just 16 of the 35 required chapters. Each chapter represents a specific policy area where the candidate country must align with EU standards. To this day, only 1 chapter has been provisionally closed. One of the most significant issues that Turkey is still going through is the Cyprus dispute. Since 1974, the island of Cyprus has been divided between the Republic of Cyprus in the south, dominated by Greek Cypriots, and the Turkish-controlled north, which remains unrecognized internationally. In 2004, the Republic of Cyprus joined the EU, bringing the unresolved division into the heart of European politics. The EU demanded that Turkey open its ports and airports to Cypriot vessels as a part of its accession conditions, but Turkey flat out refused, insisting that any move on this front would only happen if there was meaningful progress on resolving the broader Cyprus issue. Another major issue that still lingers in Europe is Turkey's size and its predominantly Muslim population. This has sparked endless debates over whether Turkey truly fits within the EU. Some leaders like France's Nicolas Sarkozy and Germany's Angela Merkel openly expressed their opposition to full membership, proposing instead a quote-unquote privileged partnership. Following a similar pattern, Turkey-EU relations hit another rough patch in the 2010s. One major turning point was the 2013 Gezi Park protests. What started as a small group of environmental activists opposing a development plan in Istanbul quickly snowballed into nationwide protests, with people demanding greater freedom of expression, a free press, and judicial independence. The Turkish government's response was brutal, using violent force to crack down on protesters. But this approach didn't go unnoticed and drew sharp criticism from around the world, especially from the EU. 3 years later, in 2016, there was a glimmer of hope when Turkey and the EU signed a landmark migrant deal. Under this agreement, Turkey pledged to stop the flow of migrants from the Middle East into Europe through its borders. In return, the EU promised billions of euros in financial aid, nearly visa-free travel for Turkish citizens, and an acceleration of Turkey's EU accession talks. On paper, it looked like a win-win situation. Turkey delivered on its part and drastically reduced migrant crossings and eased the crisis that had overwhelmed EU member states. But the promised benefits for Turkey never fully materialized. Visa-free travel stalled, and the EU accession negotiations barely moved forward. For Turkey, it felt like yet another broken promise, deepening its resentment towards the EU. But Erdogan learned a valuable lesson from this. He had found the EU's weakness. By loosening control on migrant inflow, he could create a crisis for Europe anytime he wanted. This dynamic only fueled the deep mistrust between Turkey and the EU, with both sides wary of each other's intentions. Just a couple of months after signing the migrant deal, Turkey faced another major crisis in July, a coup attempt by part of its military aimed at overthrowing President Erdogan. The coup ultimately failed, but Erdogan was enraged, not just at the coup plotters, but also at the EU. Instead of offering immediate and strong support for him in Turkey's democracy, the EU's response was slow and lukewarm. To Erdogan, it felt like Europe had abandoned him in a moment when solidarity was desperately needed. So naturally, things only got worse from there. After the failed coup, the Turkish government launched a massive crackdown, firing or arresting thousands of civil servants, military personnel, journalists, and academics suspected of involvement. But this time, the EU immediately condemned these actions as undemocratic, which only deepened Erdogan's anger and widened the already growing rift between Turkey and the EU. By late 2016, Erdogan himself publicly suggested that Turkey might need to explore alternatives to the EU. One of these was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. While it was more symbolic than realistic, Erdogan's comments showed how disillusioned Turkey had become with its EU ambitions. Around the same time, Erdogan began forging closer ties with Vladimir Putin. After the coup attempt, Putin was one of the first world leaders to call Erdogan and offer his support, a gesture that Erdogan didn't forget. Since then, the two leaders started building a closer relationship. Erdogan viewed Putin as a partner who didn't lecture him about democracy or human rights, making their relationship more appealing. This growing friendship quickly expanded into deeper cooperation, especially in areas like defense and energy. For example, the purchase of S-400 in 2017. By now, you can probably see the complex love-hate dynamic Turkey has with both the West and Russia. And this is exactly why, even after 6 decades of trying, Turkey still hasn't been admitted into the European Union. Even now, there's no clear path forward. With the EU promising future membership to Ukraine, that's likely going to take priority for the next several years, leaving Turkey once again in limbo.